B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to jump into this very unique and special, beautiful, glorious teaching from the Baal HaTanya. And even though generally our shiur is focused on Shabbos, and we've been going through step by step, through the stages of Shabbos, the concept of Shabbos, we've been looking at Kabbalah Shabbos very deeply. We're going to take a little bit of a detour, but it's not that much of a detour, as we'll see, but it is somewhat of a detour into Purim, which we've been focusing on really the last 2 weeks, but the last week more specifically, as we prepare ourselves and do hachana necessary for us to build kalim, like the tzaddikim taught, to build vessels for this great day of Purim, this amazing doorway that opens up on Purim every year, that tremendous spiritual energies are rendered accessible for us. We have to build a kli for it, otherwise it will come down, has nowhere to stay. So the way that we build kalim is by yearning for the Chag, by davening to Hashem that we should merit to experience the profundity and the depth of what the Chag can avail us and offer us. And the way to work up yearning is to learn very deeply. What is it? What is the Chag? What are we trying to access? What's the deeper meaning of this Yantiv? What it holds for us in potential. And the more that we're learning, the bigger the vessel we have. We go into the Chag. It's something else. So, b'siyata d'shmaya, even though usually we're all over the place, different sources, different teachings, mixing them together, for this particular shiur, we're going to focus on one drasha from the Heilige Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, Zchusi Hagan Aleinu, a primary disciple of the Maggid of Mizrich, who himself was a primary disciple of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And this is found in his Sefer Torah Ar, which is a collection of drushim on the Torah, or the first two Sfarim of the Torah, Bereshis and Shemais, and then the rest is called Likutei Torah. And this drasha is found in the section entitled Megillas Esther, and it's number 8. It's number 8. So with Hashem's help, we're going to delve into it together. For many of us, it may be the first time that we're properly learning a piece of Chassidus. You get to see how it's developed from beginning to end, and it's a world, it's a universe. Mamash, a universe. This itself, if this was the only thing, this drasha that we're learning now was the only thing that came out of the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov, it would already be a chiddush and a derech and a gilui and a revelation. Mamash, if this was the only thing that came out, you'll see the teachings of the tzaddik, and particularly of this nature, are universes in and of themselves. And so let's, b'siyata d'shmaya, endeavor to explore this together with the help of Hashem. So let's begin at the beginning. As we see, there are going to be different charts and different stages. We're going to try as best as we can to break it down clearly so that we should understand the mahalach here, because it does unfold and it fragments into different details and stages, and we're going to try with Hashem's help to present it in a coherent, clear way, all in the schus of all of us gathered here in person, those that are joining on Zoom and on Facebook and everywhere else, and those who will be listening to this. B'siyata d'shmaya. And one more technical note before we begin is that it's very important that the chevra ask questions. The reason why we don't take questions during the shiur is because the recording goes out, Baruch Hashem, to people that are listening to it or will be listening to it in the future. And if you've ever listened to shiur and where they're interrupted every 6 minutes, with a question that no one can hear and an answer that's not relevant because they don't know what the question was, it's not geschmack. It's not geschmack. So we try to keep it just fluid, and also for me, just to halt cup with everything, to present it. But that doesn't mean that it's not important for you to ask, and it's not important for us to discuss these ideas. So if you do have a question, try to either remember it. If you don't have a pencil with you or a pen, or borrow one from one of the chevra that have, write it down, and at the end, Be'ezer Hashem, it's an open floor. So that's a very important thing. Okay. Without further ado. The Alter Rebbe says, the Gemara tells us, it's an obligation for a person to become mivusam. It's a very interesting word. It doesn't necessarily mean drunk. We take it to mean to drink, to become drunk. But besume is melashon besamim, to become incensed, but not like an angry way, to become spiced, in a very amazing way, which could also mean drunk, I guess. I don't know, we just invented a new one. I got spiced, this prayer. I don't know, but to become besume bepuria, which we translate to mean drunk, ad lo yada, until a person does not know bein har Haman levarach Mordechai, what it means that Haman is to be cursed and Mordechai is to be blessed. Mom is drunk to a point where everything falls apart. It's very, very deep. Very deep. A lot of different interpretations of what this means. But here the Baal HaTanya takes us mamish to the depth, to the Amalek. And we're going to see as we go through references to what we've been learning about Kudsha B'rich Hu, Shchinte, unifications, things that we've talked about in previous year, which we'll make reference to. So he says, Ksiv, the pasuk says that we focused on a lot in the previous year, Ki yad al keis ka. Hashem's hand is on his throne, so to speak. Rashi tells us from Chazal, making a shvua, that there's a war against Amalek in all generations. And we pointed out from Chazal, which Rashi brings, that this word case and this word ka are truncated, right? There's an aleph missing from the word case, because it should be kisei, and there's a vav ke missing from the name ka, which should be yud ke vav ke. 3 letters that are missing, aleph and vav and hey, and we spoke about what these signify, HaKadosh Baruch Hu settling down in the world, which would mean the unification, just to review very quickly, of Kudsha B'rich Hu, which is the transcendent element of godliness, so to speak, as godliness, and then Shchinte, the Shechina, the indwelling presence, the lived experience of being able to perceive Hashem from behind the physical facade. That's called Hashem is settling down into this world. Amalek wants to banish Hashem to the upper realms. We called that Yud K, which is the Indian of Yismuchu HaShamayim, Rosh Tevis, Yud K, Yismuchu HaShamayim, that's the heavenly realm. But that Hashem should not settle down into this world. Maybe there's a conceptual God that exists somewhere, but he doesn't accompany me. He's not a personal God who cares and takes concern for every aspect of my life. That's what Amalek wages, a war against Emunah. That's this pasuk. Siv yad al keis ka. And therefore, there's a battle against Amalek all the days. And the Baal HaTanya explains an incredibly deep understanding of what this yad is, which we'll be focusing on Be'ez Hashem at the end of this year. V'amar Razal, and Chazal tell us based on this pasuk what we just said, she'ein Hashem shalem, ve'ein hakisei shalem, that the name of Hashem is incomplete, and the chair of Hashem, so to speak, the way that Hashem settles into this world, incomplete all the while that Amalek is in the world. To understand this. Hine ksiv, the pasuk says, Reishis goyim Amalek v'achrisai adei oived. Amalek is the Reishis, is the first of all the nations. Among all the nations of the world, we have Amalek. That's Reishis goyim Amalek, says the pasuk at the end. V'acharisai, what's the end of Amalek? Because Amalek has a Reishis, but it also has an achris, the klipa. Achrisai adei oived. He ends up being completely obliterated and destroyed. But Reishis? In the aspect of being first, he's Reishis Goyim. He's mamash the first of all the nations. We spoke about how Amalek parallels Am Yisrael in the negative side, in the Klipa. Am Yisrael are also called Reishis. Bishvil Yisrael shenikru Reishis. And Amalek is called Reishis Goyim Amalek. But Amalek has an achris, and that achris is a non-achris, because it's an achris, it's an end of decimation and destruction. Achris adi oive. The pasuk is telling us that Amalek has these 2 features, these 2 aspects, one of which is called Reishis, and the other of which is called Achris, a beginning and an end. What's the shoirish of this Reishis and Achris? Where does it come from? Where does it derive from? That Amalek has an aspect of beginning and an aspect of end can only come from Kedusha. Everything that exists is rooted in a spiritual source of holiness. And then as it develops further along the chain of creation and development, further garments, more concealment, more physical, more corporeal, until it becomes, chas v'shalom, something else. But it's all rooted in holiness. So he says, the pasuk tells us that Hashem created everything in a system of parallels. Zeh l'umas zeh. Everything exists in a system of parallels. And we know that in holiness there exists the concept of first and last, of beginning and end. As the pasuk says, and there's Hashem speaking, Ani Rishon va'ani Achron. We spoke before about Am Yisrael being the klipa contrast of Am Yisrael. That Am Yisrael are called Reishis. Over here, it's even much more than that. It's the anti-God, so to speak. It's mamash against HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoid v'atzmai, the Ein Sof. Because Hashem is Ani Rishon v'ani Achron. Hashem has a kiviyachol, not has a beginning. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I am the beginning of all that is, and I am the end of all that is. All there is Ein Oid Malvade. All there ever was, all there ever is, all there ever will be. Haya, Hoive, Yiyeh. Ani Rishon v'ani Achron. Keneged this, in the Klipa, we have Amalek who's called Reishis Goyim Amalek v'acharisai adei oived. Says the Baal HaTanya, what is this aspect of first and last as it relates to Hashem himself? Pirish, what this means is, Rishon, this word Rishon as it relates to Hashem, Shu Soiviv Kol Almin, is this aspect of Hashem, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called surrounding all worlds. Which, without getting into the depth of it, is loosely associated with the concept of Kudsha B'rich Hu, transcendent, beyond, the absolute, that doesn't take any kind of form and doesn't suffuse its light within anything created. It just is perfect, pristine atzmos. Soivev Kol Almin. It surrounds all the worlds. And that's Kudsha B'rich Hu. That's called Rashis because that's where things begin, on the level of the spiritual, on the level of the heavens, on the level of, in our terminology, Yudke, Yismuchu Hashemayim. That's called Soivev. The heavens surround the earth. Umekoyre de Koila, the source of everything. Vani achroin, and the concept of, and I am last, which can be interpreted to mean I, says Hashem, can be found and discerned and identified, embedded in the final levels of creation, which we know is called Malchus, right? Our physical created world, the last Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, last. Bechinas Memalek Kol Almin. This is the aspect in which Hashem says, I fill all worlds, I surround all worlds, and I, says Hashem, fill all worlds. Bashamayim imal, in the heavens above, Kudsha B'rich Hu, V'ala Oretz mitachas, and in the earth below, which is an aspect of Vav Kei, which is Rosh Hashanah, V'sagel ha'aretz, right, the physical aspect. Mitachas rois oilam, like the pasuk says, Hashem is within everything. That's called the Shechina. Kudsha B'rich Hu, transcendent, Ani Rishon, and the aspect of Shechinte is imminent. Memalek Kol Almin. That's called Ani Achron. Contrasting this, concealing this unity of Rishon and Achron is Amalek, who's called Reishis Goyim Amalek. He hides the beginning. V'acharisai adei oived, he hides the end. Amalek also has a Reishis and an Achris. Kain yesh b'klipa v'sitra achra b'chinas Amalek. So here we have, in contrast to these two revelations of Hashem, that it's our task to unify in all of our avodah, to reveal the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be experienced and lived with, and thought about, and contemplated, and experienced in day-to-day life, regular day-to-day life. That's our task. But there's Amalek that hides this. B'chinas Reishis Goyim ein Sheva Amamin. Who are the Goyim, the nations of the world? There's the 7 nations that Am Yisrael are commanded to wipe out. Haknani, Achite, Amori, and so on and so forth. Shem Zayim Midas Rois, which correlate to the 7 lower Midas, which we spoke about in previous shiurim, that there are really 10 spheros we spoke about, 10 fundamental foundations for the building, for the blueprint of existence. 3 of them we said are intellectual, Keser, Chachma, and Bina, we said. So intellectual in the mind, thought processes, but the way that those midos manifest in our lives are the 7 lower midos. Now those 7 lower midos are midos of Kedusha. We're going to learn a lot about them now. They're holy midos, Ava, Yira, Rachamim, and so on. But these 2, like everything in holiness, have a contrast on the other side, and that's called the 7 nations that need to be wiped out in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Those 7 nations represent the anti of the use of these midos in a way of holiness. V'reishisam, but v'roisham, like at the beginning of them, hu b'chinas Amalek, is the aspect of Amalek. Hu b'chinas achris Amalek, adei oived, hu soif madregas aklipas, v'tamtsisam, shu inin iskarbas koach harasha b'chol mida, hu geluya, v'toikfa. And the end of Amalek is the lowliest place within corporeality, physicality, the lower realms of existence, beyond any midos that are used in a proper way or in an improper way. It's just dross, physical, mindless corporeality. That's called the end of Amalek. The beginning of Amalek is the head of all the midos, and he uses them for Ra, as we're going to see. That's the beginning of Amalek. But the end of Amalek is mamish, the realm of total concealment. And And this is what we refer to in Chazal as Rasha V'Raloi, which really means that there's a tzaddik v'toiv lo tzaddik v'raloi. Like we know, there are some righteous people that have a great life, some that have a very difficult life. There are some Risha'im, some very not righteous people that have a great life, and some who have not a good life. That's called a Rasha V'Raloi. He's a wicked person. V'Raloi has a hard time. But he says what this means is, it's really an explanation, a description of Amalek. Pirish, v'ramilosh and rala shamayim v'rala brias. A person it doesn't mean evil to heavens or evil to others, but rala shamayim, rala brias. Shu inyan haroiges vakas. There's anger there. There's an inability to jive with other people. There's an antisocial tendency, a destructive tendency. That's called a ra, and that's Amalek. Amalek is a Rasha V'Raloi. His whole thing is pirud, separation, the inability to be toiv lebrios, which means to connect with others, to cause connections to take place within the metaphysics of the world. Hashem, Kudsha B'rich Hu Shchinte. Amalek is Rasha V'Raloi. His whole thing is ra lebrios, the opposite of connection, the opposite of synthesis. V'leiv achzari, a heart of cruelty. Sheva mitoikiv his gabras hara, sheish le eres kanachash, that comes from the proliferation of evil that is like poisonous, like a snake. And that's also an aspect of Amalek. As we know, was embodied, the first time he shows up in history is where? Is in the Garden of Eden, in Gan Eden, as the primordial snake, the Nachash. And that's where all the negative forces of Amalek that manifest throughout time, that's the beginning of it, is in the Nachash. V'nikra acharisai shel Amalek, and that's called the Achris of Amalek. Ubechinas Reishisai, and the beginning of Amalek, like we're saying, the Reishis, who Reishis Goyim Anal, Mikaris Avas Amidos Hara'os, is the birthplace of negative midos, negative traits, use of ava, of love for lowly things, use of yira for lowly things, tiferes, and so on and so forth, all the midos in a negative way. That's called the Reishis of Amalek, and the functionality of the conscious human, using midos in a negative way. And the achris of Amalek is just total devolvement into chaos, into anarchy, into separateness, into disparity, into Rasha V'Raloi. That's called the achris of Amalek, where things don't come together in ani achrin, that the end of history that's so fragmented with many different narratives all come together in ani. By Amalek, it fragments infinitely. That's called the Rasha V'Raloi. That's the achris of Amalek and the Reishis of Amalek. Ubechinas Reishisai Reishis Goyim Mekaris Havas Hamidas Harois V'Savav Taldoisav V'Nikra Bechinas Amal, and this is called Amal. This is called frustration. Amal, iniquity, sin. Adam la Amal Yula, toil, which talks about functionality, talks about using midos in an improper way, channeling things inappropriately. And that's what the pasuk means when it says "V'loi ra'a amal b'Yisrael." Am Yisrael be'etzem have no amal. We are programmed to use our midas in a holy way for holy purposes, and that's our ratzon. That's what we want to do. So there is no amal in Yisrael. Sha'amal hu b'chinas Amalek, and of course this word amal is the first three letters of Amalek, right? Because that's what Amalek causes. This is what amal is. But v'loi ra'a amal b'Yisrael, because Amalek is the antithesis of Yisrael. There can't be Amalek. There can't be Amal b'Yisrael, which is Amalek. Ki Amalek, I see as Amal and Laka. It's really a conjugation of two words, Amal and Laka. Laka means to strike, to hit, to be smitten with, to be plagued with Amal. Amal, Laka. That's Amalek. And Loira Amal b'Yisrael. There's none of that in Am Yisrael naturally. Amalek seeks to take our essentially holy midas and to cause us to use them in all kinds of negative ways. Ubechinas Amal hu amaster lekusis baruch hu mafrid she'en Hashem shalim, and that's the aspect in which Amalek causes there to be pirud, separateness, to make us live out of the ego, to make us live disconnected from our higher selves, disconnected from our higher mission, to live in a place of embodied self, as opposed to thinking about the world and thinking about Am Yisrael and thinking about Eretz Yisrael and thinking about history. Amalek is master all of that. He hides all of that. He causes a separation as opposed to an integration in two ways. Reishis Goyim, Midas. V'Acharisai is the total development into anarchy. That's the presentation of understanding the rashis and the achris of Amalek vis-a-vis Hashem's ani rishon, kibiyachol, v'ani achrin. Okay. Ubir adavar, now to understand this much more deeply now. Hineksiv, the pasuk says, ki chelek Hashem amai. Chelek Hashem amai. Which on a literal level means Hashem's portion is his nation. Everybody has a chelek in the world. A chelek means that his place, this is what you're connected to, this is where you belong. Hashem's chelek kiviyachol is amai, is you and me. This is his chelek. This is all Hashem has kiviyachol. And through that he wants us to conquer the world for him. We are Hashem's chelek. Chelek Hashem amai, but he says it means much deeper. Not that we are the place of Hashem. Deeper than this. Much deeper than this. Rather, Amai, he reads the pasuk backwards, Amai, each and every one of us have within our essence a chelek Hashem. That's how he learns the pasuk. Ki chelek Hashem Amai. Am Yisrael have within their essence, their spiritual DNA, chelek Hashem, which is Chelek Elokai Mimal, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he says what that means is Shebechol Nefesh Mi Yisrael, in each and every Jewish soul, Yesh Bechinas Havaya. We have the aspect of Yud Kei Vav Kei embedded in our being, and now we're going to learn exactly how that manifests, how that shows up, what it is, and we're going to take it letter by letter, letter by letter. Thank you so much for coming. Letter by letter, Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. But we start first because it's more embodied with the last two letters. Vav and then Hey, and then we're going to get to what the Yud and the Hey is within our essential DNA of our spiritual makeup. So you understand? So first we're going to start with Vav Hey, then we're going to get to the Yud Kei. So he begins right with the letter Vav. Ki Avav Shebeshem. So now we're going to learn about what the letter Vav is, because all of us have a Yud Kei Vav Kei within us. Each of those letters signifies something. What's the Vav? How does that manifest within our being? So he says, Ki Avav Shebeshem, the Vav in the name of Hashem, U'bechinas Vav Ksavos, is the aspect of the 6 directions, which are the 6 lower midas that we spoke about many times in the pasuk. L'cha Hashem ha'gedula, va'ha'gevura, va'ha'tiferes, ha'netzach, va'ha'hoid, and then we say Kichol, which is gematria Yesod. Right? These 6 midas related to the 6 days of the week, and all the patterns of 6s that we have throughout nature, this is the bulk of existence, and all of us have a vav within ourselves rooted in these 6 midas, but as we're going to see, it's really 3 essential midas, which are Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Love, fear, right? And then the synthesis between them. Because the next 3 are really just like a carbon copy of these first 3. Netzach, Hoid, Yesod is the same model, right? Netzach is overpowering victory, endurance. Hoid is just submission, like glowing, letting things be. And then Yesod also is the synthesis between them. So the Iker, the primary thing really is just 3. Is Ava, Yira, and Rachmanus, as it's called, or the Midah of Emes, both of which are associated with the Midah of Tiferes, of synthesis, of broad-mindedness and nuance, as we're going to see. So here he presents it. And this is how it is within our spiritual makeup. We begin with Gedula. Gedula hi bechinas chesed. Droya yemina bechinas Avram Ehavai. This is the aspect of Avram Avinu. It's considered, it's connected with the right hand, which is associated with power and strength and hispashtos and spreading out. Yamina techapkeni. It's the right hand that reaches out to hug and to draw in. That's the aspect of love. Avram Ehavai. Avram, my beloved, says Hashem. Sha'avasi Yerusha Lazare Acharav, that has given his love and his Ava as a Yerusha to all of his descendants, which is you and me sitting here tonight. That each of us have the capacity to awaken a love for Hashem within our heart. Even beyond the love, because the word love is a difficult really to grasp. An adoration of, an obsession with, an infatuation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can live this way. We can mamish live. That's called Avram Ehavai. That's the midah of Chesed. That's one of the 6 midas that becomes the letter Vav of Yud Kei Vav Kei that all of us contain within our being. Limshach acharov, to feel drawn after Hashem, uladavka by, and to connect with Him all the time. And whatever we're doing, like we always speak, to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to talk to Him in your own words, to live with Hashem as a vibrant presence, a reality, not a concept. And certainly not some, the object of like a rote ritual observance of Orthodox Judaism. Certainly not that. Mamish, a vibrant, real presence, moment to moment in my life, in our lives. The ahavativus, this is called in the Tanya, ahavativus, a natural love that we have. That's called chesed. That's midah number 1. Now we move to midah number 2, gvura. Ugvura draya smala. This is called the left hand. Shubichinas pachad Yitzchak. This is the midah that's embodied by Yitzchak Avinu. Shikasha ratza ledavka by Yizbarach v'yasem ilav liba liyizbayne b'gdulasi Yizbarach. That when a person wants to connect to Hashem, and we have that love, and we understand what it might be to live a life connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvayda b'atzmai, and we start to contemplate who this being is, kiviyachah, that we want to connect with. Whoa, that brings upon ourselves a tremendous experience of pachad, of yira. There's tremendous amount of fear. When the heart truly contemplates and understands what it means, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite. We have no conception of what this means. We referred to this in previous shurim as the bechina of rachaik, right? The bechina of Kudsha B'rich Hu, that inspires awe. It's just the hoid of Hashem. It's just the glow of Hashem that extends upon the earth. But Hashem Himself, like we say, Kudsha B'rich Hu, the etzem of Hashem, soiviv kol ha'almin, is removed and distant to an infinite degree. As we discuss in another place. Like the malachim that say out of fear. Well, what do they say? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. What does Kadosh mean? Kadosh means removed. Kadosh is the root of Kudsha B'rich Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why they say that with aim of yira. Because that's the reaction to the concept of Kadosh, is to say, they have to say it with tremendous fear, because like we learned from the Berditchever, when does a Jew bow down out of yira? Meirachik. Not just that they bow down standing far away, but from that aspect in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is perceived and understood as being infinitely rachik. That no mind can grasp, and who's infinitely removed. Here he brings that pasuk. That the nation saw the sounds, and the lightning, and the thunder. Maksiv Basrei, what's the next pasuk? Vayara they saw, Vayanu'u, and they trembled, Vayamdu meirachik, and they stood far away. Why? Because this is called a response of yira. Machmas hayira, v'u'bechinas small gesundheit, v'u'bechinas small doiche. And this, in contradistinction to the right hand that reaches out to draw in, the same pasuk says, a small doiche, the left hand pushes away. This is rooted in the left hand, the concept of Yitzchak, the antithesis of Avram, who's the midah of chesed, who responds, so to speak, to Hashem's immanence, to Hashem's kirva, and to wanting to live a life where we can perceive Hashem and connect with Hashem through everything and in everything, by way of everything. This is called small doich, the left hand that pushes away. When we contemplate the greatness of the Infinite One, blessed be He, and His holiness, which means His removedness, right? His transcendence, His being distant from our experience, and essentially and fundamentally and absolutely hidden and concealed. Shuram v'nisar in kates, to an infinite degree, doicho mashbalas atzmai. So we begin to push ourselves away, rightly, from that aspect. Leimar, a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, mihu asher ariv liba legeshes, like Hashem says, who dares approach me? Whoa, it's a big gilui to recognize that, to understand what's at stake here. There's yira. And that's midah number 2 of these first 3 essential midas out of the 6 that are the vav of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. But here we come to the third midah, the synthesis between them, where we learn that it cannot be that the small should be doiche completely, where we begin with ava, and we say, okay, I want to connect to this, and then yira, and then we run away and go home. Now that's not either mahalach, right? Because Hashem doesn't want that. Hashem doesn't want us to be frightened into submission to the point that we stop pursuing the object of our ava. Rather, like the pasuk, like the Baal HaTanya says here, the intention is not to push us away completely. As the pasuk says, Hashem's truth should not overwhelm us and bewilder us. That's not the purpose of understanding Hashem's being rachik. That's not what we're after here. Pirish, that fear should not cause us to be nivas, terrified, and to fall away and to stop trying to access kedusha. The whole purpose of us experiencing awe, experiencing rachik, experiencing Kudsha B'rich Hu soiviv kol almin, is for the purpose of what? For an aliyah. And that ultimately is captured and manifested through the midah of Yaakov Avinu, who is the synthesis between Ava and Yira. That's the midah of Yaakov Avinu, of Emes. Shu harachmanus al arichuk v'yirida gedola, where we're able to perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu as saying it's true. On the one hand, I'm very close. On the other hand, I'm very distant. But two things can be true at once. Truth is multifaceted. This is the Bechina of Yaakov Avinu, where we don't have to look at these two things in isolation. There are certain cultures, Chinese culture, there's a concept that on the one hand, there's the pragmatic aspect of life that's called Confucian, right? Confucian theology, where it's just very focused on the social constructs and political and day-to-day mundane life, which the Chinese were always very good at. And then there's the aspect of the spiritual and the transcendent. These two things don't have to be in conflict, and they don't have to either be engaged with through two different modes of being. They are absolutely one and the same. And this is one of the chidushim of Yiddishkeit. They're absolutely integrated. Not just that there are both. That's already a start. It's true. There are both. It's not just technical. Also a spiritual aspect that's yafeh. But the question is, can you see them as being identical? That's called Yaakov Avinu. That's called synthesis. Life is multifaceted. That's the rachmanos of Yaakov Avinu. And that's why Yaakov Avinu's midah is called in the Zohar Kodesh mavriach min hakotze el hakotze. There was a part of the Mishkan that went around the middle rings throughout the whole Mishkan. One miraculous pipe, one pole that went around and bound the whole Mishkan together. And the Zohar Kodesh says that's the midah of Yaakov Avinu. That's in the middle of the krushim, binds the whole thing together. That's Yaakov. That's called mavriach min hakotze el hakotze. It reaches from one end to the other end, from Ava to Yira, Yira to Ava. Synthesis binds everything together as one. That's the midah of Yaakov Avinu. Pirish. What this means is shemalo mekasher mikatzei tachten al katzei elyon. From beginning to end, from left to right, Yaakov is the center, and he brings everything together. As the pasuk says, LeYaakov asher padas Avraham. The pasuk seems to say that Yaakov Avinu was the one that redeemed Avram kiviyachal. How could that be? Avram Avinu came long before Yaakov Avinu did. How could it be that Yaakov Avinu in some way redeemed Avram Avinu? Says the Medrash, it was in the schus of Yaakov Avinu that Avram Avinu got out of Ur Kasdim, was saved from the fire. Not because of his own merit, but because he was destined to bring a Yitzchak into the world, who was destined to bring a Yaakov into the world. And that's what the pasuk says. Yaakov Avinu's futuristic existence redeemed Avram Avinu. Says the Baal HaTanya, let's look at this with deeper eyes. It's not just talking about Abraham and it's not talking about Jacob, right? It's talking about the midah of Yaakov. It's talking about the midah of Avraham. So the midah of Yaakov redeems the midah of Avraham. After an experience of Yitzchak, which is awe, so then Avraham seems lost. Avraham is in Ur Kasdim. The midah of Avraham, we're speaking about the midah, the experience of kirva, of love, and so on, that's lost. But then, what happens? What happens next is Yaakov Avinu is poide Avraham, which means the midah of Yaakov Avinu, which is the midah of Rachmanas, is poide Avraham. That's what it means over here. Uchsiv li Yaakov asher padas Avraham v'goymer. Sha'idei midas Yaakov choyzem ha'ores ha'ava k'dichsiv mirachok Hashem nirali. Yes, there's an aspect of rachok. That's called the aspect of Yitzchak. That's called the aspect of Yira. There is a rachok, but there's a way in which may rachok daika from that experience Hashem nirali. That's called Yaakov Avinu. That's stage number 3. First there's a tremendous Ava, then there's a tremendous Yira, and then Yaakov Avinu comes and his Poida Avraham says, it's true there's a Mirachak, but still Hashem nirali. Good, there's a way of synthesizing the two. There's a way of bringing the two together. Avraham being a Bechina in certain sense of Soiviv Kol Almin, Kudsha B'rich Hu, infinite love, Yitzchak being the concealment of nature. It's itself, in a way, yichud Kudsha B'rich Hu Shchinte, right? Yaakov Avinu is the synthesis, brings these two together, bridges the gap. This is Yaakov. So far, so good? We're holding on? Yeah? Okay. These are the three midas. But it's a problem, because what we're trying to get to here is 6, right? Because we're trying to get to the vav of Yud Ke Vav Ke that each of us have within ourselves. This is just one of the letters, right? So we're trying to get to 6. So far we did 3. So he says it's not a problem, because those 3, as they develop, move within themselves, meaning to say within this subset of a 4-tiered system of Yud, Ke, Vav, Ke. So within subset number 3, there is a 2-tiered system, where there's the root of these midas, which is called Ava, Yira, and Rachmanas, and then there's the practicality of these midas. How do they manifest themselves within our day-to-day avodah? 2 tiers. Okay, so now we're moving from tier number 1 in the Vav of Yud Ke Vav Ke down to tier number 2. And here's how he does it. Really, there are 6 midas, Keneged Avav, that we're talking about, that are in Hashem's name, but these 3 carry over into the world of practicality. They don't just remain spiritual mekairis, right, for some kind of energy that we have within our general experience, the human condition. They become embodied in our avodas Hashem. How so? Ve'hein b'chinas Torah, avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. These 3 experiences, these 3 stages of Ava, and then Yira, and then the synthesis of Yaakov, become Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. Not in that order. Gemilas Chasadim, Avodah, and Torah. As we're going to see in a minute, aided by the chart, Be'ezer Hashem, which is on the next page, which we'll get to. So let's go through this, and again, in a timely fashion. These are very long teachings, what can I tell you? I'm trying. This is, by the way, not one of the longer teachings of the Baal HaTanya. This is like a medium-sized teaching. Not for pages and pages and pages. But this is the ni'imos of Torah, like we said, in a generation that wants everything in 5 minutes. You'll get, the quality of a 5-minute video. It might be nice, but I believe that our generation and our neshamas are yearning for amkus, imke amakim. Not the little inspiration. Our souls are desperate for long-form content. We have to have the rigor for it. We have to have that. But if we have that and we're seeking, there's no spiritual illumination like the illumination that comes from long tires. Step by step. I won't keep you that much longer than usual, don't worry. But step by step. Okay. Let's go through them one by one. Dahainu, hachanas halev aras hamidus lias tachlis shleimas hamaisa. The ultimate things to bring the Ava, the Yira, and the Tiferes down into the Maisa. So he says, step number 1, lias besimcha v'tuv leva. First thing is joy. Why joy? Because we've learned that there's no simcha like, well, Ataras HaSfeik is true, but there's no simcha like integration. Right? Where the Kudsha B'rich Hu is able to manifest in the Shchinte. That's what we spoke about in the context of Kabbalah Shabbos, like going back to that Rav Chanina, right? Who was the simcha of going out to the field, Chakat Buchen Kadishin, the rectified world, and so on. That's the integrate. That's the simcha. So the first thing is that Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim all need to be engaged with joy, if they are to be engaged with consciously. Otherwise, you just do them without feeling anything. And he brings rayas to this. Listen to this. For this alone, it was worth coming tonight. Just this one line. Gemilas Chasadim zu tzedakah. Gemilas Chasadim means charity. And the pasuk says, Shenemar lo yeir levavcha v'gaimer. That our hearts, when we're engaged in giving charity, shouldn't do so in a way of yeir levavcha. The Rama says, right, if a person gives without a smile, it's not a very high level, even if you give a lot, but to give a little bit with a pleasant countenance, with a smile, with chen, changes the game. Needs to be done with a level of simcha. That's called Gemilas Chasadim with simcha. Avodah, which is davening, siv, the pasuk literally refers to avodah in the pasuk about the importance of serving Hashem with simcha, because at the end of the Teichacha, it says that all these things will come upon you, tachas, because asher loy avadata b'simcha v'tuv levav. You didn't serve with joy. And so that's avodah and simcha. And then Torah, the Gemara says in Psachim, there's a whole shakavatari over there that talks about different things that need to be engaged with simcha, and then one of them, the Amiram says, v'chein ledvar halacha. learning also needs to be done with simcha. So here you have Torah, avodah, gemilas chasadim that all need to be engaged with simcha, which on a certain level, okay, we should be happy about serving Hashem. But on a deeper level, we understand that these three are receptacles in the aspect of shchinte within that subset of a system for the elements of Kudsha B'rich Hu, for the midas, and that's the greatest simcha there is, when we're able to integrate the higher roots of our psychological and emotional being into Kalim. That naturally produces simcha. So that's step number one. But now he gets into how these three things correspond to those three midas. Kamil es chasadim, or rather, vehein gimel kavim, yamanu small ve'emtza kamashikasav miyaminoi eish das lama. These three things, Torah, avodah, gimel es chasadim, also align with the right, which is Ava, with the left, which is Yira, and then the center, which is Rachmanus, or the right, which is Avraham, the left, which is Yitzchak, and then the middle, which is Yaakov Avinu. And the way that he wants to set this up is by looking at a pasuk where HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to having given the Torah miyaminai, from his right hand, Eish Das Lamai. It's a fire, right? A fire, Eish Das Lamai. It was to him a fire that he gave miyaminai from his right hand. So he says, let's take a look at the elements in this pasuk. The word miyaminai, and I bolded it to help us focus. Miyaminai. So that's obvious, right? What's the yamin of Hashem? Which one will that refer to of these three? Obviously. Chesed. Tzedakah. Right? Miyamina is obvious. Who? Gemilas chasadim with tzedakah, which is chesed, droya yamina, right? Which is the right hand. That's the aspect of chesed. Eish. What's fire going to be? Fire. It's the opposite of water. Fire is gevura, right? Water is chesed, called meimei chesed. Avram Avinu yukach nama at mayim. Avram is busy with mayim, digging wells. Avram is chesed. Yitzchak is eish. It's gevura, pachad Yitzchak. So eish in that pasuk, it means minai eish. So eish is gevura. Hu bechinas gevura draws smala. That's the left hand. I'm going to go through this paragraph quickly. Hold on tight. V'hu keneged avoida, and this is the aspect of avoida. Shu avoidas hatfila, which is the avoida of tefillah, because the whole avoida of tefillah is to recognize what? That I have nothing. That's what the avoida of tefillah is. Because if I had things, I wouldn't need to daven. And so the very premise of tefillah is the realization that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Makayr, the Koila, is the source of all, and I am an empty vessel. And I'm standing there, ka'ani bepesach, like David Amalek says, tefillah la'ani Kiyata, if David Amalek is just, I'm an ani, right? That's what tefillah is. The essence of tefillah is David Amalek. David Amalek is Malchus. Malchus is the Shechina, is just a kli. And that's the aspect of avoida, the humility that comes from contact with the source. And that produces busha, that produces a feeling of richuk, that produces awe, yira, subjugation. Kabbalas al Malchus Shemayim, yira. Mibnei Malchusi is bar kamelech sha'omed alav, like a king is standing over you. As the pasuk says, that we shall place a melech over the nation, but it's not just talking about over the nation. That we should sign tasam alecha melech, that on each and every one of us when we come into tefillah, we should envision in our minds like we're standing in front of a king, as the halachas do dictate, right? Certain ways of dressing and so on. And it's also relevant for Purim, obviously, right? That's the halacha. You can't daven when drunk, right? Or even having drunk to a point where we're disillusioned, right? Why? Because you wouldn't speak that way to a king. Tefillah is mamish standing in front of the king on every level. Soim tasam alach hamelech. And that's how yira falls upon a person. Ki inyan hayira, like we learned in the context of Rabbi Yanai, hu machmas kirvas hadavar hanoira. Yira is produced when in a chanami there's kirva. Kadosh Baruch Hu is imminent, but what is it? What is close? Davar hanoira. Whoa. You come into contact with the awesome thing, with the awesome understanding of how distant HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, how much we need HaKadosh Baruch Hu for everything. That produces yira, awe. It's the same thing when a person contemplates al derech avoida, to think about the infinite, the absolute, and even so, that infinite force is very here, is very present. It's not just existing somewhere distant that I don't have to care about it. All of life is an experience of that. That's awesome. That's the word we use. It's awesome. HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills this physical space. He kvoidai. That's Hashem's glory. So then a person feels yira in his heart. In Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim that Amshachas Malchusi is Baruch Lamata B'Tachtoinim. Hagam She'acher Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim Kriya Shema Nemer V'Yahavta. He says, but how is that so? How is that so that you're telling me that Ol Malchus Shemayim brings about Yira? What's the first thing we say after being Mekabel Ol Malchus Shemayim, which is called Kriya Shema, Baruch Shem, and then V'Yahavta Hashem Elokecha B'Chol Levavcha. How does that align? Instead, what should it say? V'Yaresa Me'Elokecha, right? Like the pasuk tells us, it should be Yira right after Kabbalah Ol Malchus Shemayim, not Ava, in accordance with what he's setting up. So he says it's true. Because that's true. That's the first paragraph. It's called V'Yahavta. What's the second paragraph? It's V'Hayim Shemaya, and that's full of pachad. That's full of V'Aretz Loisi Tines Yivula V'Avatem V'Chulei. That's full of pachad. It's Kabbalah's HaMitzvahs. And so in a Chanami, there's the stage of Ava. Because Ava comes first. Ava is the kirva. But then again, we become conscious of what exactly is close. And that's paragraph number 2. That leads to Yira. So we have Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. It first breeds a tremendous sense of Ava. That's V'Yahavta Hashem Elokecha B'Chol Levavcha. But then very quickly we become aware of just what this thing is. And that becomes the second aspect of Yira. It's possible to suggest, he doesn't say this, that the third paragraph is Yaakov Avinu. And how, I'll leave that to all of us to think about and develop. But maybe that's the synthesis of these two, right? Because there is a clear distinction between paragraph number 1, paragraph number 2. Anytime that there's 3, right, and the first 2 are in contradistinction, then the third is a synthesis. So that's for Tzarachian, right, to look at that paragraph of Vayomer and Parsha of Tzitzis, v'chulei. A lot of Torah to say, no time. Fine. So that's that. Raksha b'tchila, but in the beginning, Nimshach mizeh ava. Yeah, in the beginning it leads to love. Shiur tzaddik boy. We want to connect to this thing that's imminent, this Ol Malchus Shemayim. Want to connect to that. V'acher kach, afterwards, kisharoitz ledavka boy. Kisharoitz ledavka boy, when we want to connect. V'yasim libel is boyne b'gdulasi is baruch shulamata k'moy lamala as I namshich mizeh ayira. So stage 2, when we start to contemplate a Kadosh Baruch Hu being here, and what is being here is the Ein Sof, that leads to Yira. K'dichsiv, as the pasuk hints, Avraham hoilid es Yitzchak, right? In the beginning it told us, Eila told us Avram, right? Yitzchak ben Avram, and then it says Avram hoilid es Yitzchak. All the Mefarshim say, what do you mean Avram hoilid es Yitzchak? Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. You just told me that. You said Eila told us these are the chronicles of Yitzchak ben Avram, Yitzchak the son of Avram. So what do you need to tell me now that Avram gives birth to Yitzchak? So he says very deep. Again, we have to develop eyes that don't see Yitzchak and Yaakov and Avram and Moshe and Aaron, all these biblical personalities as representing historical figures. We need to start seeing them as the embodiment of spiritual paradigms. So Avram becomes Midas HaChesed all the way through, and you read the episodes this way. It's called Pnimius HaTorah. It's a different way of learning. However, don't get caught up on things now. It's for afterwards, mamish, because there's a lot to do. So what does it mean, Avram hoiled es Yitzchak? What does the pasuk mean to teach me? Yitzchak ben Avram. We already said this. But the pasuk means to teach him. That the midah of Avraham, paradoxically, which is the midah of Chesed, gives birth to the midah of Yitzchak, which is the midah of Gvura. Because the very same comprehension that led to Avraham then very quickly gives birth to Yitzchak, which is embodied in the first 2 paragraphs of Kriya Shema, the first being associated with Avram, and then very quickly we move into Yira, to an awe. It's unbelievable. Avram hoilid es Yitzchak, and we see that 3 times a day in Kriya Shema. After Ol Malchus Shemayim, yichud, boom, Ava, Yira. Avram hoilid es Yitzchak. It's coming to tell us that the midah of Avraham produces the midah of Yitzchak. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, the midah of Yira. And the midah of Avram doesn't happen in a vacuum. Yira and Ava go together. Right, with love and with awe and with love. These 2 things go together. Vidima Barina. They're all one. And it's the same thing with the karbanas. It's referred to, the Gemara in Chagiga refers to Aryeh de Esha de Achel Karbanin. That on the Mizbeach, the fire looked like a lion that was crouched. In the first Beis HaMikdash at least, that was crouched to take the karbanas. Wait a second. Aryeh of fire? Those 2 things don't go together. Aryeh means Midas HaChesed. Aryeh is always on the yamin of the Merkava, right? He's on the tzad yamin. Fire is gevura. How does it? So the answer is no. these two things always go together. Because anytime there's Ava, there's Yira. Anytime there's Yira, there's Vaitar Ava. Because Yaakov Avinu then comes to redeem Avram Avinu. Pile plies. We see how deep our Torah is, Chevra. It's a joke. There's nothing else out there, I promise you. There's nothing else that comes close. Chachma b'goyim tamin. Maybe there's some chachma there. Torah b'goyim al tamin. Does not exist. Ad ein sof. Pile plois. Mavil al arayan. Emes lamitai. So here he develops that. B'chinas pnei aryeh ala yamin. Right? On the Merkava, the face of the lion is on the right side. That's the midah of chesed. But the eshas, fire, b'chinas kavur is what's going on here. So he explains, these two things are bound together. It's the same thing, that the Leviim, who are Gevura, because the Kehanim are Chesed, Kohen is Chesed, Levi is Gevura, Yisrael is Tiferes, right? Anytime you have three. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? Brings it back. So Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. Wait a second, how could Levi be Gevura and the whole time they're singing? Shira comes from the world of Chesed. How could that be? Even though Rina comes from the Gevura, they're getting to that, but he says Shira. It's true, they are Gevura, but they push the Gevura away through their Shira, and this is the way that it is always. Right and left are bound together. This is one of the siders of why Breslov Hasidim, when they're davening, at least in other times, are clapping, because it's trying to bring together the right and the left, and to be mamtik the two of them, and to awaken that within our being. Right and left always have to go together, particularly within Breslov. I wish we had more time to develop that theme. Now we don't, but these two, it's got to be balanced. This is the secret of being a yid, is the balance, the integration on every level, in every way. Ava and Yira go together, but b'chinas mati v'lai mati, it's reaching, it's not reaching, b'choza b'chinas eish, and that's the aspect of fire. Fine. So far we have, again, that was a tangent, but we have miyaminai is chesed, we have eish is gevura, and then das. What's das? Really missing an ayin, but if you add an ayin, it's daled ayin taf, which means das. In the Sfarim, das is seen as a Rosh Tevis for divrei Torah. Right? It's a reference to Torah. It's a reference for das. Right? We call in modern Hebrew, das means religion. Right? Das. Right? Dati. Right? What does it mean? It means to be religious. Right? Das. So das is going to be a reference to Torah, because again, if miyaminai is gemilas chasadim, eish is a bechin of avodah, as we've developed. So what's das going to be? Torah. Torah is the balance between them. Tas, hu kavo amamutza, is the line that's in the middle. Hu b'chinas ha-Torah, shenikra Torah is emes, which is called the Torah of emes. Why is it called emes? What is the word emes? What does it mean, truth? Truth means nothing. This word truth, this English word truth, it doesn't mean anything, right, in and of itself. But the word emes is pregnant with meaning from beginning to end. Because what's the letters of the word emes? We mentioned this in the past many times. Aleph, mem, taf. Aleph being gracious. Taf, right, the first letter of the Aleph base. Taf being the last letter of the Aleph base. It bridges everything, and that's the midah of Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is called the Ish Emes. Titein Emes li Yaakov. Why? Because that's what the midah of Yaakov is, to bridge Aleph and Taf, which in this context is Avraham and Yitzchak. And that's why the Mekubalim tell us what it means that he was in Ish Tam Yoshev Oyhalim. He sat in two tents. So the Mekubalim say it's the tents of Avraham and Yitzchak, because that's Yaakov Avinu. And that's why Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Oyhalim. What does it mean? Ish Tam means a simple person. But the letters Ish Tam spell Yesh Emes. Same letters. Yesh Emes. Yoshev Oyhalim, because he sat in the tents of Avraham and Yitzchak. The tents of Avraham and Yitzchak, that's the tents of Emes. Aleph all the way to Taf. That's Yaakov Avinu, and that's the Torah of Nasan Lanu Tairas Emes. And that's why Das comes after Miyaminai Eish Das. Right? Because the Torah is what brings the two together. Without getting into this now, Torah is founded on synthesis. Assays and lois assays, right? Kasher and pasal, Tameh, Tahar, Mutter, Aser, the Torah is this place of the tikkun of right and left. And that's Yaakov Avinu. So he says that's MSM Aleph Baroisha Oisios. Remember Emsaum V'Taf B'Seifim, the Taf at the end. Shubachinas Mavriach Men Akatze El Akatze. This is Yaakov Avinu from one side all the way to the end. V'Zehu Midasei Shel Yaakov Shenemar Titein Emes Li Yaakov. V'Zehu, and then finally we have this word Lamai. Well, what's the word Lamai mean? Lamai means to him. Eish das Miyaminai Eish das Lamai. Says the pasuk, it's all bringing us to him. Through Eish Das, through Miyaminai, Eish Das. Avoid at Kamilas Chasadim, Avoida and Torah Das. Going to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm sorry, lamai. V'zeh lamai, perish a love. Kalaymar, how do you get to Hashem? Shenimshach miyaminoi eish das? Lamai. Kedei lachzar, ulekashri love Yisbarach, to bind ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's midas, ava, gvura, tiferes, through their lower manifestation in Kalim, which is called Kemilas Chasadim, Avodah, and Torah. So that's the letter Vav of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Very sadly, we're running out of time, so we have two options here, Chevra. Mamish vote, and really, I mean this seriously. We have Purim coming up. It's a tremendous hachana for Purim. It will take easily another half hour. So, by raise of hands, who is interested in continuing to the end? If not, I'll add it on the outside. And if we have a majority, we'll continue. And whoever needs to leave can leave. You'll pick up the recording. We have a majority, so we'll continue. Whoever needs to leave, mamish, no, whatever. It's and you'll catch the recording afterwards. But let's push forward. It's a special shiur. It's a unique thing, and not that like we don't go overtime all the time, but now like we're really going overtime. L'chatchila, not as a b'diavad. Okay, so let's plug in and let's push. Let's push. Let's push. Fine. That's the letter Vav of the way in which we embody Yud Kei Vav Kei. Take a look at the chart over here, and we can see in this chart all of these elements that we've learned over the last hour or so. Let's just take a look very quickly. Why are there 6 bolded words? Because that's the letter Vav, is that there are 6 midas. The first tier is Chesed, Gvura, and what we call Rachmanus, which is rooted in Tiferes. If you take a look at the boxes underneath, it describes, just from the word of the Baal HaTanya that we just learned, what these midas are. We're not going to go through them now, but just to have. And then their manifestation. So we have Gemilas Chasadim coming from Chesed, we have Avodah, which is Tefillah, coming from Gvura, and we have Torah coming from Rachmanus. And how they plug in to Simcha, we said, Gemilas Chasadim, V'lo yireh levavcha, Avodah Tachas Shalei Avadta B'Simcha, and then Torah is V'chein Ledvar Halacha, and then finally the way that they plug into the Pasuk Miyaminai, Eish Das. So really just in this chart, we have the last hour. Fine. Now we move to the last hay. What's this final hay? Because we understand what the Vav is within our being. Good. So it seems like it's everything. I mean, that Vav is pretty much everything, right? It's not. It's still 1/4 of our religious functionality. Because it's got to go more practical than that. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim is not the end of the way that these things become practical, because that still remains conceptual. So I theoretically understand the way that my tendency for love expresses itself in wanting to give, and the way that my tendency for awe expresses itself in my desire to relate to Hashem on the level of tefillah, and my tendency for balance expresses itself in Torah. Fine. But now the question is, are you doing it? Am I doing it? He says that's called the last hay of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Let's take a look. If you look at a hay, take a look at the diagram right under the paragraph, you can see the letter hay, and it's really composed of 3 different lines, right? There's the line that's vertical, there's the line that's horizontal, and then there's the line that sort of diagonally synthesizes the 2 of those. See, he says the 2 that are connected, and he makes a point of saying this, which is going to come back at the end. Shnei kavim michubarim. There are 2 lines that are connected, that meet, and those 2 are Bechinas Machshava and Dibur, thought and speech. Those are 2 lines of the final Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which we have within ourselves. He doesn't say which is which, don't know. Again, Sarichian, more thought needs to be put into that. But we have 1 line going up, and we have 1 line going across, and those are Machshava and Dibur, thought and speech. 2 of the 3 essential capacities for functionality within the human experience, thought and speech. What's the final? Action. The 3rd line, which is the line in the hay, is the aspect of action. As the pasuk says, Hashem created all the worlds, and then finally he says, Af asisiv. And then I also made them. I did them. I created them. And we have that within ourselves, as has been expounded, says the Baal HaTanya in another place. I want you to keep in mind, not only is this 1 page of the Baal HaTanya's writings, this is 1 page of a whole section on the Megillah, and the whole section of the Megillah is a tiny percentage of his commentary on the Torah. And the commentary on the Torah is only 1 sefer of 2 volumes, which is called Likutei Torah and Torah Ar. We're learning now from Torah Ar, and that's only 2 svarim of the Baal HaTanya's 5 svarim that are in Tanya, and that's all within the world of the Baal HaTanya. Now tell me the Hasidus is a bunch of cute Hasidish amaises about some, emotional idea on like clapping too much. People, they don't know what they don't know, Chevra. They push it. The ignorance is astounding. It's not their fault. The depth, the lucidity, the clarity, this is what people need. So people are desperate for, they're thirsting for it. They don't even know. They don't know what they're missing. Different world. What a privilege. I'm just trying to focus us in, like, it's a universe. There's so much to learn. Ashreinu. Machshava dibur maisa. Vihine. Or ve'inyan. Shetzarach laham shebechinas havav lebechinas hahei. The whole avoida in this world is to take the vav, and first of all, to identify what the vav is, to feel the vav, to now understand what my avoida is in the world. And then to be mamshich the vav down into the hay, to bind these two things together. What's the hay? Machshava dibur maisa. Okay, do it now. Right, that's the avoida. That's called being mechaber, the vav and the hay together, of the second quadrant of Yud K, Vav K. Shehuliyas milubashim, to enclose all of the energies of Chesed, Gevurah, Rachmanas, as we said, Gemilas Chasadim Avodah Torah, down into the lavush of Machshava, Dibur, Umaisa, She'im Mula'im and Amidas, the Kedusha. They should be absolutely saturated with the holy Midas. Fine. Then he throws in, don't get distracted by this, a little bit distracting, but he throws in that there are two subsets of the hay in and of itself. He just alludes to them quickly, because the word hay, the letter hay, can be seen either as just the letter hay, but in Kabbalah, every letter is seen as a word, because you can't pronounce just a letter. Nobody has ever pronounced the letter Aleph. If you say Aleph, you already said a Aleph, a Lamed, and a Pei. Nobody has ever said in Aleph. It's unpronounceable. And the same for the other letters, because you cannot say Aleph. So you said Aleph, but you also said a Lamed and a Pei, because you said Aleph, Lamed, Pei. Right? You cannot say Aleph. Like, what is it? Where is it? It's that's not the letter, right? The letters are inexpressible. These are called in Kabbalah miluyim, the filled aspect of the letters, where I take a letter and I spell it out the way that it's said. So Aleph, again, just using that as an example, becomes Aleph, Lamed, Pei. Now, certain letters have many different ways that could be spelled. Hey, for example, can be spelled in three ways. Hey, 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 Aleph, and hey, Yud, right? Vav, the same thing, is to be spelled Vav, Aleph, Vav, or Vav, Yud, Vav, or Vav, Vav, right? Vav, with a kamat. And all of these produce gematrias. It's very complicated, and so on. Now, in this context, he says, let's take a look at this last hey of Yud K Vav K. He says there are two subsets of this where we can spell the letter hey in two different ways. So first there's hey that's called b'milui hey. It's spelled hey acheres. He says that means that hey is hidden. And that's the machshava. He says, what's that hey signifying? The hey within the hey? He says, when we speak, which is the aspect of dibur, there are 5 moitza'os hapeh. There are 5 different places from within our mouth and throat where the speech come from, right? All the 27 letters of the Aleph, 22 or 27 letters of the Aleph base, including the 5 double letters, are split among 5 different sounds that we produce with our mouths, right? There's the tongue sounds, there's the lip sounds, there's the palate sounds, there's the throat sounds, there's the breath sounds. All these different sounds are called the chameshus moitzais hapeh. His chiddush is that because the letter hey, which signifies machshava, dibur, maisa, can actually be spelled hey and then another hey, that means that those 5 aspects of dibur, without getting into the practicality of it now, because I don't know what it is, tzarich also apply to thought and to action. So it splinters machshava, dibur, maisa weiter into 5 different aspects. That's the hey way of pronouncing the final hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei. But then there's hey aleph, v'yesh hey aleph, b'milei aleph, shebechinas ha'hel ma'oid na'le b'chinas aleph pela v'chulu, which he doesn't elaborate on. That's talking about the shoirish of Asiya, the shoirish of machshava dibur maisa, which comes from the pela elyon, right? Because soif mas is reflected of machshava tchila, right? And so machshava dibur maisa, and we're going to get back to this, is really rooted in this hidden, concealed place that architected this thing called thought and speech and action. That's hey aleph, where there's an essentially ineffable part of thinking, speaking, and doing. Even though those things are seen as so pragmatic and practical and embodied and actualized, there's a mystery there. That's called hey aleph. There's a mystery. Okay, now we've covered the first two letters, and now we're going to move a little bit more quickly, because he doesn't go very deeply into the first two letters, which of course, as they might suggest, are more ruchni. So what are they? What do they manifest? So now he goes into the first two letters, and then we're going to take a look at another chart that tells us all those things, and then we'll come down to the home stretch with Hashem's help. So we have Yud, the letter Yud within our identity, hu bechinas nikud ila, is an aspect of the elevated nikuda, of the elevated point. What does that mean? What's an elevated point that I have within my identity? That's the Yud. What is that? Hu bechinas mashikasav is the aspect of the pasuk that says vayetze kevarak chitzai, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu's lightning, or chitzai, his arrows go out like lightning. It's just a flash. It's a flash from a realm beyond, like lightning is, that reaches down and snakes through the night sky for a brief flash of a second, and then it goes back to its original place. That means that our neshamas emerge from a place that's called the Yud, that's called the Nakuda. Like the earliest dawn of creation, rooted in the letter Yud of Yud Kevavke, which, like we spoke about, it signifies the aspect of Chachma, of Reishis Chachma. It's the earliest beginning of the unfolding of creation. We have that within our identity. We all carry within ourselves a Yud. That's the essence of our being that we have as babies, without doing anything, without thinking anything, without speaking anything, even without feeling anything, or even understanding how those feelings embody themselves in anything. The nekuda pnimis of our nefesh, that's called Yud. That's called the Yud. Me'ayin liyesh, that's the place where there's a bridge that bridges the gap between nothingness and somethingness. The Eves HaMuchlat. Ki b'machshava achas baras ha'olam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, machshava achas. Sha'akol b'chinas me'malek kol alma v'soiviv kol alma eina ela machshava achas. In that place, everything is one. Transcendence, immanence, Kudsha B'rich Hu, shchinte, chesed, gvura. It's just a flash. That's one. That's called the Yud, and we have that inside of ourselves. And finally, the Hei Rishayna, the first Hei Yud Kevavke, hu b'chinas hispashtus ha'olamais ba'oirach v'roichav. That's when things begin to develop within our identity. Still beyond the feelings and the emotions, but within the ways that we think and the general cognitive constructs that make up our identity. Right? That make up our identity. That's how things develop. And then there's the embodied experience of, okay, now that I have a source, and now that source has developed in some way, now I can feel, and now I can act, and now I can v'chule. Right? But things start in a very ethereal, essential, you can say subconscious place. V'hayud, but the Yud, going back to the Yud for a second, Nikra, Nekuda Behechalash Ubechinas Bittel, that's called the Nekuda Elyoina. So here, just look at the chart. Now that we have all of these letters, let's just take a look at them one by one. We start with the letter Yud. Yud, we say, is Nekuda Ilah, that's the elevated point. Do Reishis and Mekaris Avas Odamas Vischatshusa Me'ayin Liyesh Ve'evas HaMuchlat, that's a very lofty, elevated place that we have inside of ourselves. The letter Hey is where things begin to emerge. You can even, if you want, you can see the letter Yud as being the top corner of the letter Hey. And so the letter Hey is really nothing more than an extending of the Yud, L'oirach L'roichav. That's what he's referencing. And then it goes down to that point within, which can be seen as the letter Vav, B'chule, right? So things are developing. The Hey is Hispashtus Olamas Ba'erach V'roichav. What's the Vav? The Vav, like we learned, Chesed Gevurah Tiferes, and then the lower element of those six, Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim, and then finally we have the final Hey, the three Kavim, Machshava, Dibur, and Maisa. Fine. Now we're coming to the end. V'inei kol amidas v'amachshava dibur Maisa d'kedusha sheb'chinas Vav Keshe b'shem nimshach m'bechinas bitol. He says, in order for us to utilize our holy emotions and to maximize those emotions and to manifest those emotions in holy acts that have a specific content, chesed, davening, learning, and that become manifest within thought and speech and action, there's only one way. There's only one way to utilize these things in the proper way, and that is that they need to be founded on the foundation of what's called bittul. Total nullification. Total purity of heart. and intention. Dahainu, and he explains, when a person literally thinks, not just, and this is a far deeper gilui than yichud Kudsha B'rich Hu shchinte, because over there, okay, there's a world, there's the godliness that's beyond the world, there's the godliness that manifests in the world. Wait a second, that's already 5 chapters in. Chapter 1 is that there is nothing. That everything is an illusion, and that ein od milvado doesn't mean that there's no other God but Hashem. It means that there is quite literally nothing but godliness. Elokus, elokus, elokus. Bittul. 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 Shegasher yizboinin bebittul hasagas hanavram lagabe abar yizbarach she'ein toivsim makom ukolei mamish nechshavu. We don't take up any place. It is all an illusion. It's a very good illusion. Hashem wants us to live in the illusion, to rectify the illusion. That's fine. But not to move away from that ultimate understanding of the nothingness of things. That paradoxically gives them infinite value. The more that we realize that the value that we were ascribing to things before is a dimyon. Now the world matters because the world is nothing. Now the world starts to become something. It just, boom, like a lightning flash, this whole thing is created. It comes from nothing. It comes from within the everything. It comes from within the Ein Sof. So as yasim elav li by ruchim neshmasi liyas laHashem levade. Then you can know, and I can know, that we're engaging with these midas and with these actions in a way that's true. Because otherwise, as we're going to learn, Amalek creeps in. And when Amalek creeps in, Ein Hashem Shalom, Ein Hakisi Shalom, isn't simply talking, and that's not simple, about this great, like we said, metaphysical unification between Kudsha B'rich Hu shchinte. This is what Hasidus wanted to do. It took Kabbalistic concepts and it blocked them into the human. And it said, there's a yichud Kudsha B'rich Hu shchinte within you. And if there's an Amalek, there's a disconnect, everything falls apart. What Hasidus did for Kabbalah is that Kabbalah sought to take us and to bring us into the Shemayim, which it does very successfully, but Hasidus wanted to take Shemayim to put it into earth. It's a different mahalach. So the Baal Shem Tov's chiddush was that he started to read all of the descriptions of the oilamos and spheres and all the different dynamics and the interplay between shemus and so on and so forth, all as existing within what's called the oilam katan, the miniature universe of each individual. That's what the Baal Shem Tov did. And this is a prime example of the Baal HaTanya doing that. Because everybody speaks about Amalek in the context of separation period in Kudsha B'rich Hu shchinte. But now that we're understanding that you and I have Yud Kei Vav Kei within ourselves, then we can understand that there's a unity that's supposed to be forged within our own being. And then Amalek becomes something even more relevant. Even more relevant. Because if a person says, you know what, I really love Hashem, but it's not coming from a place of bittul, then there could be any one of a million motivations why you and me, whatever, this person, from his own, from his own egotistical self-consideration, feels that it's appropriate for him or her to love Hashem. That's not what we're getting at. It has to start from bittul. So you may have the vavke, but it's separated from the hey and the yud, from the shirish of things, from the makar of things, from the bittul of things, from the way that the yud of chachma, that itself is just called an akuda behechala, that yud starts from a point. If you look at the very top of the yud, that's where the cipher starts to write it from. That's called the Kudsha B'rich Hu. And after that, there's just white. It's the white page. Meaning the white parchment, the aspect of the infinite, before anything emerges. That's where everything comes from. That's where everything is going to. That's what our task is, to live this life and to elevate, to draw down, to draw up, to unify. But it has to be coming from a place of bittul. But if not, so then there's mafrid shem yud kei mivav keshamidas etzla b'bchinas yesh va'ava mergeshes yesh mishu ayabol vad. So then a person will just have ava, or will just have yira, to suit the moment, or to suit the setting, or to suit the person's own self-consideration. That's mitoshel lishma balishma, whatever. Not getting into that. It's all good, and it's much worse to not have any ava or yira at all, and so on. But that's not the l'chatchila that we're aiming toward. Bittul, 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 bittul. The Baal Shem Tov wasn't about gadlus ha'adam, it wasn't about tikkun amidas, it was about bittul. It was about einod malvada. It's a whole different game. The Baal Shem Tov, it's a whole different derech. Legamri. Bittul. It's an avoida, the Kutzker. It's an avoida, MS, be'espoidus, davening, worrying. Where's this coming from? Is it in the right place or in the wrong place? Rabbi Shalom, please help me. V'tarli beinu, la'avdecha be'emes. This is the avodah of Hasidus. Otherwise, a very treacherous game, religious commitment. Very, very, very treacherous. Because you never know if it's righteousness or self-righteousness. Very, very, very deep. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of tefillah and a lot of espoidus and a lot of mesiras nefesh, as you're going to speak about, and v'chulei. This is the derech of Chasidus. We want it to be be'emes. Otherwise, we're not fooling anybody. Even though we're busy fooling ourselves and Hashem and the world, but at the end of the day, so you didn't fool, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows. Hashem knows what's going on, and He wants authenticity. He wants sincerity. He wants transparency from us. That's what He wants. So that's what we're speaking about over here. All kinds of other forces get in, and that can quickly lead to the 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael that we have to get out of Eretz Yisrael, that are covering over the Kedusha of the land. I can't tell you how deep this is. I'm so happy that we continue to the end. It would have been mamash half of a thing. It'll be worth it, I'm telling you. Just stick with me a couple more minutes. It's sweeter than sugar. Mamash. Matok mi dvash. Mesuka mi dvash v'noifes tzufim. Hachacham dachayas b'alea. It's a little vacation. So he says that's the aspect of Amalek. Shu b'chinas hayesh. Amalek wants to drag us into the delusion of yesh. He wants to separate us from being connected to the place of ayin. Amalek wants to make a pirud, keep the ayin up there, but this world is this world, and there's no Hashem down here, there's no spirituality down here, and there's just cars and fancy shalach manases even, and different things. That's what there is down here. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu can stay all the way up there. That's what Amalek wants. There should be a pirud. He's called a yesh. And so Amalek wants to do the opposite of what bittul means. Mamish the hepech habittul shenimshach mishem yudke. He wants to separate us from yudke. He wants to cut off vavke from yudke. Shuam mechase umaster is gal shem yudke. He wants to cover over the shirish of things. And that's what it means that Amalek has a rashis, meaning to say that Amalek has a rootedness in the letters yudke because that's where it starts. He covers over the yudke. That's called rashis goyim Amalek. And then he also has an achris, which is called the vavke, become to completely devolve into anarchy, like we said, and into confusion, and to obscurity. No person ever did an Aveira until a Ruach Shtus came in first, the spirit of folly. What is that spirit of folly? Says the Baal HaTanya, it's Amalek. What is the spirit of Amalek? Yeshus. That in that moment we forget Hashem. That's called the Ruach Shtus. In that moment we act for our own self-gratification, and we forget that I'm only here as a servant. I'm only here as a soldier. I'm only here as a channel. That's hollow. It's supposed to be transparent. It's supposed to serve a greater source, together with other fragments of glass, that together we become the window through which Hashem's light shines to the world in Or Lagoyim. Clouds up the window. What does Chachma mean? Harayas Hanoila. That's what Chachma is. That's the Yud of Yud Kevavke. It's able to see how things develop from an earlier place, from a source, from a shirish. V'zeu ein Hashem Shalem. And that's what it means. The name is incomplete. Same idea. Case Aleph. What does it mean, kisei? Kisei means the covering over of the Aleph. And that's what Amalek does to the kisei, because it could have been Hashem's chair. And instead it's case Aleph. It covers over Hashem. Aleph chachma, Aleph bina. The pasuk says, I shall teach you chachma, I shall teach you bina. But all the Mekubalim say, we see from here that chachma and bina are both connected to the letter Aleph. And chachma and bina, in this model, are the Yud and Hey of Yud K and then Vav K. It's Chachma and Bina. And that's connected to the Aleph. That's the Aleph that gets covered over, because Amalek doesn't care for the first 2 letters. Amalek doesn't want us to connect to the Shirish. Amalek doesn't want us to be Mevatel ourselves. Amalek wants us to live under the delusion of a Yesh. He Atayra. Because the Torah really wants to descend into the lowliest particularities of the earth. Can we call in Israel Umayid, and our laws about planting, and our laws about reaping, and our laws about everything in life, and our laws about brachas, right? Now laws about sleeping and waking up from, and so on and so forth. That's the Torah. That's yored, that comes down into this world. V'nikra b'lashon kisei. Here he says. Okay. So here, right, in the way of kedusha, it's called a chair. When a person settles down into a chair, kachu inin Torah. That's the Torah. Which manifests itself down into a chair, down into the lower realms of reality. That's called Alefcha Chachma Alefcha Bina. Chachma starts on the Torah starts on the level of Chachma and Bina, but it's meant to be yored. It's not meant to exist as a concept. It has a practical application, implication, integration into our lives. And I'm only cover this over this kisei. Eina kisei shalem. They say the Torah can remain as some kind of some kind of academic research paper. But it doesn't mamish come down into my life. That's Amalek. That's Amalek. B'chinas chitzonius. Yardav and a slab should be in and out of mazeh gashmim. Ha'kisu b'chinas markavah b'chinas hakaram. Yardav and ishpelu. When it be esek haTorah, it's tzarich liyas l'shma. But it's got to be l'shma. What does l'shma mean? Says the Baal HaTanya Pirish b'shvil haTorah atzma. For the sake of the Torah, lishma is l'shem hey. What's the hey? Hey means a lot of things, but hey can mean the final hey v'yud kevavke, which is practicality. Machshava dibar ma'isa. Lishma is l'shem hey. I'm learning the Torah, lilmad almanas lasois, to do it. That's called lishma. L'shem hey, to bring it down into the machshava dibar ma'isa. That's the anti-Amalek, because Amalek just wants you to learn, but not lishma. He wants you to know a lot of Torah, not lishma. Umi kamchi Yisrael, right? So he says that's what it means. Pirish b'shvil Torah atzma lahamshich ba b'chinas aleph kameshikasav, to draw down the aleph. Umi kamchi Yisrael goy echa ba'aretz, and that's why we're called a goy echa, not just a nation that's living wherever we're living, ba'aretz. We're a nation that reveals godliness in the depth of the artsius, in the depth of physicality. Shemamshichem b'chinas yichudi is barach hafilu ba'aretz, down in this world mashe ein kain. But the Gemara says tragically, ha'imar einli ela Torah. Oh, I only have Torah. Without my sim Torah, the Gemara says terrible things. He says even Torah you don't have. That's not called Torah. Person is a big Talmid Chacham, but it doesn't show up in the Maisa. It's nothing. Mamish no. So your computer. That's Amalek. It's not Lishma. It's Obechinas Amalek HaMafred Aluf, who separates the letter Aleph from the lower realms. This is the last stage. I'm not going to read the rest inside. I'm only going to read the next 2 paragraphs, and then the rest I'm going to say outside, and we'll finish. Okay? This is all the problem. Everything we said now until here is the problem. Meaning, Amalek comes to get in the way of our inner yichud. Yud, K, Vav, K, understanding very deeply what all those things are. Amalek comes to disjoint the whole structure, cause us to become fragmented, egotistical, disconnected from Hashem, and so on and so forth. And we know the pasuk that tells us about the problem. Ki yad al keis ka, milchama Hashem Amalek midar dar. Yad al keis ka. Those 2 words are the problem. Keis ka. Missing aleph, the missing vav k. Right? We understand that very deeply now in the context of our own psycho-spiritual makeup. That's the problem. What's the solution? Listen to this. Pil a plois. What's the solution? Says the Baal HaTanya, the solution is in that pasuk too. Everybody's overlooking it. Says the Baal HaTanya, the solution is in the pasuk. And the solution is captured in the word yad. Yad. That's the solution. That is the Mulchaman Amalek midar dar yad. What does this mean? Let's delve in together. Try to focus last few minutes. Achinia eitza yuutza. What's the tikkun? What's the solution? Neged Amalek. Hu mashikasa. What the pasuk says. Ki yod al keiska. There's a hand on the chair of God. Perish ki bechinas yod hu lamala bechinas kisei bechinas yudke. Yod al keiska. Meaning, if we can access this aspect of yad, that's above keiska. Meaning, it helps us transcend. It helps us overcome the hurdle of keiska. That's what it means very deeply. Not just there's a hand on the throne of God. Yad is above keiska. This is very deep. This is very deep. What is that? What is that yad? So he says, "Ve'inin kiyesh gimel yados." There are 3 yados in the Torah. There are 3 kinds of hands: Yad HaGedola, Yad HaChazaka, and Yad HaRama. The Psukim tell us that Hashem took Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim with 3 different yadayim. There's one hand that's called the Yad HaGedola, the hand of strength. There's one that's called the Yad HaChazaka, strength. Okay, so we have to translate gedula differently. Yad HaGedolah, the great hand, and then the strong hand, and then there's called the Yad Rama, the elevated hand. Listen to what the Baal HaTanya does. When did he come up with this? Like, I don't understand. Like, the go'iness is otherworldly. It's otherworldly. V'hine. He says, look very carefully at these three words. The pasuk that includes the word Yad HaGedolah, the pasuk says, Vayar Yisrael as a Yad HaGedolah, right? Which we say every morning. Am Yisrael saw the Yad HaGedolah, the great hand. He says, look at the way that word is written, Yad HaGedolah, with a hey before it. And the hey before a word is always called the hey hayediyah, meaning, on a literal level, it's referring to a specific hand. It's not just any hand. Yad HaGedolah, the great hand, the hand, right? The hand of Gedula, greatness. Behei hayediyah, she'yodasu maseges, what we can understand, what we can grasp. And he says that's the Yad HaGedolah. Gedula is always related to Chesed, and that's why we say in the first bracha in Shemona Esrei, we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a kel hagadol, hagibar, v'hanoira. Gibar, of course, is Gevura. So the Gadol is Chesed. L'cha Hashem hagdula v'hagvura v'atiferes. This is Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes. So the Yad HaGedolah is the midah of Chesed. The right hand. Hu Ava. This is love. Shema Oira Adam L'Davka B'Yizbarach. Himuseges or Mergeshes B'Leiv. We can grasp that, we can get that, we can perceive that, we can feel that, we can connect with that. We understand what that is. We feel love. Well, we know what that means, to love something. V'chein b'yad hachazaka. The same thing with the word hachazaka, the strong hand. Ksiv ulachol hayad hachazaka. Again, behei hayediyah. It starts with the letter hey, hayediyah. Sheyad hachazaka hu ayira. That's of course going to be a reference to the left hand. The left hand being correlated to Yitzchak, being correlated to Gevura. Din. That's the in of Yira, Gevura, Droya Smala. It's the left hand that's called Droya Smala, right? The left hand. With small doich, that's the left hand that pushes away. We are mashpal ourselves. Skip the next paragraph. He explains that when we get into Shemona Esrei, after that experience, we can rightly say Slach lanu avinu, not just kichatanu because we sinned, but in the context of Al Malchus Shemayim, we say Rebbeinu Shalom kifashanu. Like this is more than just sin. We understand who we're supposed to be connecting with. We can even say kifashanu. That's what he says in the next paragraph. Let's finish. Ach bebechinas yad Rama, and this is the whole tikkun. This is the whole shiur. This is it. When it comes to the Yad Rama, Ksiv Uvenei Yisrael Yotzim B'Yad Rama. There's no Hey Hayediyah. Refers to an elevated, lofty hand, but it doesn't say Yad Harama. It just says Yad Rama. Beloy Hey Hayediyah. Do you know why? Because he says this hand Ki Yotzim Ksiv. It says we left. Ksiv. What that means is Pirish She Yotzim Min Akli Ugvul. Yotzim b'yad Rama doesn't just mean that Am Yisrael got out of Mitzrayim with the elevated hand of Hashem. It means that any person that wants to leave any kind of limitation, any person that wants to access a place that's beyond the ability to capture it in words, any person that wants to move beyond an experience of Hargasha, of Yesh, to contact a place of Ayin, to contact a place beyond the self. Hayotzim, you want to leave Mi'ala Gvul and connect to a place that's beyond the ego. B'yad Rama. We do this through the through the concept of the Yad Rama. B'chinas nesias nefesh l'kayim hashekasav eilecha Hashem nafshi esa. This is Rebbeinu Shalom. This is beyond Ava and Yira. This is an aspect of Father in heaven. I am clearing myself out of the way so that I can lift myself to you, straight to you. No stops along the way, with no consideration of different midas and gvuras and Ava and Yira and gemilas chasadim and chaz. It's beyond all of this. Eilecha, that's Eilecha, right? Eilecha Hashem nafshi esa. This is the whole tikkun, what we're trying to accomplish. There's an aspect of tshuva ilah, shallah, amru razal, tshuva kadma la'olam. This is a kind of elevated tshuva that precedes the world. We leave the world when we contact this aspect of tshuva ilah that's, again, beyond ava and yira. It's bittul that enables us to connect to the first hay of Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's the realm of Bina. That's the world of Bria. Going back to earlier shiur, the Kisei HaKavod that Tshuva brings us to, and then from there to Yud, and then from there beyond. Ilech Hashem Nafshi Esa Tshuva Ilah Ki al yidei atshuva mi umka de libo mesiras nefesh. Haruach with mesiras nefesh. Mamish mesiras nefesh. To say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not that I've made a calculation and because of my assessment of my prospects of having Gan Eden in the next world, probably makes sense for me to do a little bit of tshuva now, just wipe things clean a little bit so I can... No. This is something else. This is a desperate, unfathomable level of yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's beyond the self. It's that there is no self. I am only here in as much as I want to be there with you. That's why I've been put here. That's Tshuvilah. Mesiras nefesh, haruach tashuv el Elokim. That's the spirit that flies to Elokim. Asher nasna asher nasana hi ha'oila l'makar chaytzava mamish. To the place from which we came, to the Makar Chaitzva, to the place in the Kisei HaKavod that we were etched out of. And this is the Bechina of Yaakov Avinu, going back to one of the earlier shiurim in this series. That's the Bechina of Yaakov Avinu, that's Chakak al Pnei HaKisei, which is of course the aspect of Tiferes, the synthesis of the three. But that enables us to draw in a place that's beyond the two, that's beyond Chesed Gevura, that goes straight up. By doing this, and by trying to access this state, this is how we overcome Amalek. Zokt Er, says he, this is the aspect. Go to the next paragraph. V'lachein nikra Yad Rama. That's why it's called just the Yad Rama. Shemeroi memes, it lifts us up, umenasas lemala, v'madrega gavoya ma'oid to a place le'makim she'eina yaydua umusig ba'asagas hanevram, where there's no element of contemplation, there's no element of understanding, there's no element of any kind of limitation. It's beyond. It's a moment that's an eternal moment. It's an experience that's beyond any capacity to grasp or to comprehend. It's endless on both standpoints. From our perspective, going up to Hashem, and from Hashem's perspective, opening His arms that we're not deserving. It's the Bechina of Esther coming in front of Amalek, Shaloi Kedas, beyond us, not deserving. I wasn't called to Hashem. Esther, it's me and you. Shaloi Kedas. On Purim, Inin of Chain, grace. It's unexplainable. Kadosh Baruch Hu is bound up with us b'shayrish. This is beyond words. V'zehu, and that's why he says Yad Ramah is without the Hey Hayidiyah. Because the Hey Hayidiyah signifies that which can be understood. Pele plus. So he says it's just Yad Rama. We can't have a Hey Hayidiyah because there is no grasp of this thing. There is no Hey Hayidiyah because there is no Yidiyah on this Madrega. V'zeu ki Yad. Beloy Hey Hayidiyah. This is in the pasuk. Ta'ina b'chinas Yad Rama. It's speaking about a very specific Yad. Ki Yad al Keska. Which Yad? Yad Rama. That lifts us beyond Ava and Yira. Yada Gedoyla, Yada Chazaka. Hula Mala al Case. This lifts us beyond the concealment of Amalek that seeks to cause a period within our being between Yudke and Vavke. It lifts us to a place of bittul from which, if we remain rooted in that place, Shisulim beveis Hashem, then bechatzer selikeinu yafrichu. Then we can come and develop down into the lower realms of our personality with our feelings and our actions and our motivations, but we're rooted in a place of bittul. Says the pasuk, this is the tikkun for Amalek. Ki yad, which yad? In contradistinction to yad ha, just the yad itself without any hey hayidiyah. This yad Rama is al keska, transcends the experience of the kisei of ka, which is yudke without the vavke, lifts us beyond. V'albechinas ka ki b'ka Hashem tzurei lamim. That's Hashem created the world. B'ka shoreishes habriya b'machshava achas baras ha'olam. Aval bechinas yad Rama hi lamala mala mehem bittul even beyond hey and even beyond yud, beyond. That's where the Milchama comes from. In order to prevent that Amalek should get involved with our with our experience of Yud Ke Vav Ke in our inner world, to cover, master and to hide, mafrid and to separate. There should be a gilui. Hashem Shalom, Kisei Shalom. And with this we'll end. That's Pshat, and we'll say this outside, but you'll take this home and you'll look at it and learn it and review it. Be'ez Hashem, if you have some time over Purim or Shabbos coming up, he says that is Pshat in the side of that with which we began. Chayiv inish lebesume bepuria ad de lo yada. The tikkun of Amalek is besume bepuria, to get to a place of ad to lo yada. What's the lo yada? To get to the yad that's without the hey hayadia. To get to the yad Rama, the yad that's al kes ka. This is the way that we circumvent Amalek. That on Purim we're supposed to get chaver to a place of bittul. That's the whole thing of Purim. Bittul, total essentiality, total bittul, any consideration. Ribbana Shalom, I want you. End of story. Beginning, middle, and end. And the side, ultimately, of the yad, and this is very deep, I just want to throw in one tiny chiddush within this whole thing. One tiny chiddush is perhaps, al derech efshar, that the word yad is the letter hey, because it's also the three parts, right? So the dalid and the yud, which the yud is underneath. And what did we say was in the middle? That's the aspect of maisa. Yad means that, Ribbana Shalom, I'm letting go of the machshava, of the dibur, talking about it, thinking about it. Ribbana Shalom, I'm ready to be moiser nefesh. That's the bechina of nasa v'nishma. That's yad. The yud, which is that aspect of maisa, comes before the machshava and the dibur. Total bittul, mesiras nefesh, yad, maisa, nasa v'nishma, bittul. And that's why, perhaps, on Purim, it's kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. There's a re-acceptance of the Torah in a new bechina of nasav nishma, because that's the bechina of the yad, of the maisa that comes before the machshav and the dibur, with which we are able to overcome al kes ka, the motivation of Amalek. Ashreinu. Okay, only 95 minutes. Not so terrible. Ashreinu, chevel, l'chaim. This is the Baal HaTanya. Ashreinu.